Josh Brown, does the gaming industry have a problem with the next big thing?
I think it absolutely does, Scott, because there have been so many games, so many overhyped games that have released over the years that were promised to be the revolution in gaming, and then they weren't.
They really, really weren't. We thought we'd get together and talk about 20 of them. Why not? There's some of these that have been doing the rounds for a little while. Some of them that I feel haven't necessarily been talked about in this particular way. So we'll break them down. I'm Scott.
I'm Josh.
And these are the 20 next big thing video games that still failed. Number 20, Red Dead Online.
Oh.
I've got to put it out there. I always feel going into Red Dead Online that game was, or that mode, was supposed to be the next GTA Online. I feel like Rockstar initially thought of it that way. I felt like the level of support that they put in back then was way, way stronger. And for whatever reason, it just kind of fizzled out. And you saw over the years, Rockstar double down on the GTA side of things. And I feel like Red Dead Online was just sort of left to the side. I don't even know anybody that still plays it, versus back in 2018 when everybody was jumping on it. There was all the controversy around the gold bars and the currency and whether it was worthwhile to even spend time in that place. And like I said, over time, it just seems like Rockstar were like, there's way more money in GTA Online, let's just move on from it.
It's such a shame. Red Dead Redemption 2 story mode is one of my favorite experiences of all time. And as someone who loved the glory years of GTA 5 Online, I thought, finally, they've had time to actually get to grips with how to make a live service multiplayer. No doubt Red Dead Online is going to be the next step of what was started in GTA, and then it came out and it was content sparse to begin with, but I still thought, you know what, so was GTA 5 Online.
Yeah.
That started out a little rocky. Then we got online. Heists. It wasn't even online for the first 2 weeks. We got heists at the end of the day, and then it kind of became the behemoth it went on to be. That did not happen with Red Dead Online. In fact, it got less support than any of us were expecting post-launch, and like you said, it seemed that all of the focus were on those shark cards, and what a missed opportunity.
It's more important than ever to get yourself a VPN. With NordVPN, you can protect your data and keep up with region-locked TV and content. Best of all, you can get signed up for 2 years of Nord with an up to 76% discount and 4 months off, plus a $50 Amazon gift card. All you have to do is click the link below or scan the QR code on screen now to make the most of this great deal.
Number 19, Halo Infinite.
Oh, here he is.
Hey. I know what you might be thinking.
Yeah.
Halo is nowhere near it used to be. You know, it's not the era of Halo 3, it's not the era of Halo 2 or Reach or the glory Bungie years. Hell, it's not even in the era of Halo 4 when we were getting that new beginning. So how could Halo Infinite be described as the next big thing? Well, after the disaster of Halo 5, Halo Infinite was dubbed the next 10 years of the Halo franchise. It was going to be this massive reinvention. It was going to be here to stay. It was going to revolutionize what Halo is and put it back on top. From the very first gameplay trailer, I think we all realized it was not going to be that. Textures were wonky, gameplay looked very samey, and even graphically, although it was going for a Halo 1 style, it didn't quite reach what it was going for. Do you like that little pun there?
I very much did.
We're really proud of that one. Even with a 1 year delay after the initial backlash to those trailers, it wasn't able to match up to those lofty ambitions of being the platform for the next 10 years of Halo.
It was odious.
Very good. Very good. It was too sparse on content. Yeah, there we go. No, there was not enough meat on the bone, truth be told. The campaign had a lot of good flourishes, but never quite coalesced into as a meaningful single player as many were expecting. The multiplayer went free to play, and while that was mechanically one of the best experiences in the franchise in some time, it didn't have the support post-launch in terms of the seasons that were being launched alongside it to really support it and give it that leg up that it needed. And all in all, while it was a pretty decent Halo game, it certainly wasn't the next big thing.
No, I think it's a shame because over the years you had the likes of Bungie 343 Industries talk about wanting to, what do they do after all the numbered Halos? Like with Halo 5 Guardians, it was like, this is the last one, we're going to refer to it as Halo Guardians. It's going to be this general idea of we can do subtitles, we can do future stuff. Halo Infinite, it's in the name. We've sorted it, guys, it's fine. And then could not have hit more rocks and twigs and logs on the way way to where it was supposed to be getting to, just stumbling the entire time. Playing a lot of Death Stranding at this point, I might be able to say. But yeah, I still love me some Halo Infinite, but it absolutely is not the Halo of yesteryear by a considerable distance. Number 18, the Kinect. Both times, because you forget over the years that Xbox pushed this thing twice. The idea of this camera that would sit on top of your TV or whatever, and would be able to read your inputs. That whole, I remember the whole thing with who needs a controller? The controller's a barrier. It's stopping people from playing the video games. Your grandma's trying to play this racing game, and if only she could change gears in midair, she'd be right in there. And it didn't work whatsoever the first time on the Xbox One, and then when they brought the Xbox One was the 360 was the original one, and they brought it back on the Xbox One and doubled down on it even more. Very much regarded as the dark era in Xbox, and kind of the thing that single-handedly ruined their reputation for a good long while. You could even argue it's still not fully recovered from the amount of damage that was done right at the beginning of the Xbox One generation. But it was touted as the next big thing. It was touted as this is a new way to control video games. This is a way to make sure that anybody can get involved. All these different experiences, all these different ways of controlling things, whether it's skateboarding or driving or whatever it is. I always just think of that time that Jun Sonoe tried to put his heel up, and he was like, look, you can see what's on the bottom of an avatar. And then as he turned around, the whole camera was like contorting the man. It was game over. It never really got started.
It wasn't a great gamble on Microsoft's part, was it? Especially in the Xbox One era, I think, when you couldn't even get an Xbox unless you also bought the Kinect. That's how much they doubled down on it. They were bundling it with the machine itself, saying, no, this thing is integral to the Xbox experience. Turns out it wasn't, because they stopped selling it and stopped making compatible games with it. But with all that said and done, even though the first Kinect was a worse bit of kit, at least it was funny. It was completely botched. It was what I would call a bougie iToy,
Yeah.
But as an iToy fan, I quite like that. As a Kinect Star Wars fan, I quite like that.
And let's not get carried away.
Yeah,
we're still within the watershed. The washy windows, though.
Exactly.
Bring that back.
Yeah,
if you want to make the millions.
That should have been the next big thing.
Yeah.
Why didn't we let that take off? Number 17, Concord. From Microsoft to PlayStation, here's Scott. I've put Concord on this list because while a lot of us at home realized that this thing was never going to be the next big thing, that's how it felt internally from Sony. Sony had made their plans of getting into live services very clear for the past few years, and while they had dabbled here and there, this felt like their mission statement. It was to put it mildly, a sort of Overwatch clone, a hero shooter that had the USP, the unique selling point of telling a story through its multiplayer seasons. And of course, telling a story within a multiplayer framework has been done many times before, including in one of the games that I'm going to get to later on this list. But this was different. This was not just telling a story through a couple of cutscenes here and there, not just through text logs or in-world events. It was through these high fidelity, pristine, expensive cutscenes, the kind of which you would expect from a top-tier single-player developer like Naughty Dog. And the plan was to roll these out and have that side of the game with its characters, with its world, be engaging. Now, to make cutscenes like that, it costs a lot of money. And unsurprisingly, after this game absolutely bombed at launch, thanks to the uninspired design overall, it feeling like it was coming 10 years too late after the original Overwatch boom, plans for this were absolutely cut short. It was taken off sale after only 2 weeks, and we never actually got to see if any of those cutscenes that were made would have made it into the game, or were they going to be added way post-launch, and were they still working them? I have no idea if Sony is currently sitting on a gold mine of unused Concord data and cutscenes and
just swap
maps.
the assets. Just get Nathan Drake in there. You can make it work.
But something about that reality to me doesn't kind of sit right, because I don't know what the overall plan was for Concord. It seemed like a Hail Mary, and they were just going to hope that it worked, and then they could figure it out after the fact, which is what kills so many live services like it.
The whole way this thing rolled out, I think, is historic in the worst way possible. Like, I maintain that game's limited edition controller sold more than the game itself, because that thing looked cool. Like, the patterns that were on that thing were sweet, and that whole thing that Sony's been trying to crack for like over a generation now, of how do we take the premium single player stuff that we offer and bolt it onto a modern multiplayer framework that can be, recurrent spending methods and monetization, all that stuff, but keep it palatable and have that all be first party. Like, that's their golden goose if they can figure it out. And they just keep just whiffing it over and over again. I feel like Last of Us Factions was the closest they would have got, and even that's not coming out. But the potential of Concord drastically outstripped the reality of it once we actually got eyes on it or played it or whatever it was, even though it was serviceable enough. I see what they're going for, but and it's potentially the future of their entire business, but they are nowhere near it, at least at this point of recording. Number 16, Killzone.
Oh.
The one that people keep requesting Killzone. I see you down there requesting Killzone. I remember the days. I grew up with the Killzone. I remember, it's the Halo killer. It's not. It never was. It was never the big thing. It was part of the whole fake E3 thing where they dummied the trailer and CG'd it and said, this is what a PS3 can do. And then it was a complete lie, and Guerrilla Entertainment, Guerrilla, whatever you call them, had just made it as a proof of concept, and it should never have been revealed to the public. It was a ridiculous farce. Why have I got to switch to grenades manually? Why have I got to do that? I just want to hit the button and do it.
All I've got to say
Halo's
to
always
this
better.
is, yes, it was not the next big thing that Sony wanted. Yes, it wasn't a Halo killer. Yes, it's not even good enough to revive now in the PlayStation 4 and PS5 era. But I like it. I think it's good. I wish it would come back. I want at least... And listen, get me this camera up now. Get me the camera. I want... The camera's not there. The camera is there now. Give me that remastered collection or a remake collection. You can leave the PlayStation 4 one out. I actually didn't really like Shadowfall, but the first three, give me them.
There is something about Killzone. I played through 1 and 2. I didn't finish 3, even though 3 is the best playing one. But 1 and 2, they did have something to them, like the weight, the movement, the general feel of tactility. There is a little bit of something to it, but I don't know what the hell you do with Killzone. I don't think they ever knew what they were doing with it in the first place. And it is just one of those projects that, at least to me, when I think of it aesthetically, it just feels ugly and gross, and not in the fun way. It's not in the grimy Death Stranding 1 way, second Death Stranding reference, but it just feels a little bit too just ugly.
Let's move on. Number 15, Anthem. Speaking of ugly, Scott, Anthem to me is one of the most disappointing games I have ever played, and that absolutely sucks as a die-hard BioWare fan. A fan who stuck with them through Mass Effect 3, didn't even mind the original ending of Mass Effect 3 all that much.
Sorry, we've got a fan on because it's extremely warm in the UK.
Extremely warm with all of these hot takes, baby. BioWare, it was a studio that I stuck through even when they dropped Mass Effect Andromeda. I almost naturally said Ass Effect Andromeda then. That's how bad that game was. But I thought, no, there's still part of the studio in there that I fell in love with. Surely their next game, Anthem, that was made by the then, quote, main team, that was something new, that had so much money behind it. Surely that, even though it might not have been in a genre I necessarily liked, which was that push into live service and multiplayer focus, surely the storytelling chops and the cinematic chops and the gameplay chops at that studio could pull this thing through. Unfortunately, it's another Concord case, but it's far worse off than Concord ever was. Like you said, at least from a gameplay perspective, Concord was fine. It was inoffensive. Anthem was not that. Anthem was an unfinished mess that didn't have the story to propel it, that didn't have the missions to propel it, that at a certain point in the entire experience just stops and grinds everything to a halt and says, God, by the way, you got to go around this entire map and do all of this busy work before you can progress. It just felt like a game that wasn't complete, that didn't know what it was wanting to be to begin with. And it was clear that the people at BioWare at the time just didn't have the tool set that they needed to make a multiplayer game after decades of creating high caliber single player games.
I tell you what's a shame is that Anthem and Mass Effect Andromeda, they play really well. Like if you strip everything away, just go combat model, gameplay model, whatever, the engagement with enemies, the movement speeds, the feeling of it, the weight, like that stuff is solid. Like BioWare, like regardless of how much they've messed up the stuff that is their strengths, like the storytelling, the world building, the lore, weirdly they have happened upon a good feel. And you know, we both like Dragon Age, the Veil Guards combat and everything as well, or the game overall. And I feel like they have managed to get good gameplay systems. But yeah, Anthem, and like I finished that thing, and it's like that was where I realized that BioWare just have like a template where it's like ancient race called blah. You know, we need to find the technology from the blah to stop the new thing that's coming. And I was like, you could swap it all out. Like it just felt like you were just swapping nouns around, trying to write the lore for Anthem. Even though, like I said, I thought it played fairly well, but like the original Destiny, there just wasn't enough to it. So weird thinking back on just how much of a misfire that thing was at this point. Number 14, Abandoned. Insert joke here, it's been abandoned. The game that at least to Hassan Karaman, the dude that was putting it together, was in theory, like, what a saga this game had. The idea that Hideo Kojima was initially involved, the idea that it was some sort of PT secret sequel, because that is something that Kojima might do. The amount of traction this thing got for so long, and then the way that it all played out, where Hassan Karaman had to put out this, like, well, I was going to say demo. It's not this weird wireframe menu of, like, telling people, hey, let's check out the PlayStation. Like, we're going to have this thing that you can interact with. It's going to clarify everything. And it was just the same teaser trailer that had existed to that point anyway, which didn't really show anything. It was just sort of looking at the floor, camera looking at the floor, looking around a little bit. And then dude has just disappeared from the face of the earth across the last few years. I'm including it here because of the amount of momentum that was behind it and the distance between what was really there and how much we wanted to be there. And like I said, you had Kojima getting out there going, I have nothing to do with it. Took him a while, to be honest. He could have told us a lot earlier that he had nothing to do with it. Hideo.
He's busy. He's a busy guy.
Just take him an email. Just send it to the PR. Just not involved in this. Send. That's all it needed to be. But still, the way that this whole thing rolled out, I feel like it had all the buzz in the industry for a good sort of few weeks, and then it just evaporated entirely.
I can get on board with this because I know a lot of people were buying into it. In my head, Scott, I cannot believe that people got worked by this thing. I understand we all wanted to believe that Kojima had this mystery project, and I lump Sony themselves in on that when I say that as well, because Sony was full behind it, and Jeff Keighley. A lot of people suddenly found themselves going down this conspiracy theory of maybe it could be this. I think it's maybe because I've been burned on the conspiracy front before. I was there for the Ruse Cruise in MGS5, thinking there was going to be a secret chapter that was going to launch. I was there for the indoctrination theory on Mass Effect 3. So it's not like I haven't fallen for this stuff before, but it just made me sad to see everyone overhyping this game to the point where it was considered to be the next big thing when all we had, like you mentioned, was a trailer or two. I forgot about, until you said that about holding other people to account. I remember Jeff Keighley weighed in. He said he'd been on the phone to Hassan Karaman. He said he was going to help him reveal it. What was that? What was that, Jeff? Number 13, Evolve. It's kind of crazy to think how much hype Evolve had behind it. And in many ways, kind of because it was a little bit before its time in a lot of ways.
Well, you could argue that.
If you don't know what this is, or if you can't remember, or have rightly repressed it from your memory, Evolve was the follow-up to Left 4 Dead, essentially. A lot of the same developers moving on to their next multiplayer first-person shooter hit, and it was eschewing all conventions at the time. It was going to be a big budget AAA asymmetrical multiplayer game where you had a team of soldiers tracking down a monster that was played by an actual player. So in many ways, it was kind of a precursor
Zero,
to very good to the likes of Dead by Daylight and Friday the 13th. It was very much of that asymmetrical multiplayer mold that is so successful today. However, Evolve made a lot of mistakes in the run-up to launch. One was charging kind of for it at all. It put a premium on the experience, so when it actually launched to only a few monsters and only a few maps and a rather sparse array of content, people weren't happy with that. Then there was the focus on DLC and microtransactions at the time, which naturally put a lot of people off, especially when we were at a point where the likes of season passes and microtransactions and roadmaps were kind of reaching fever pitch. This was just a little bit before Battlefront 2 completely broke the dam on that, and Evolve was one of the many firing shots, I guess, towards the fact that players did not like this business mentality. And I think overall, everything combined, the fact that the developers were coming off such a beloved and cultural shifting game, the fact that it was trying to do something different, it all culminated in an okay at best experience that did not have the staying power even after it went free to play that I think the developers were expecting going in.
I tell you what's insane is that we're talking about this in 2025. That's like obviously over a decade ago since this game came out, which in itself is horrifying. But the DLC pricing, I forget the name of the studio head, but he did say at the time that the game was built with DLC in mind. I remember that quote just being everywhere at the time because they did attach price tags to everything from the weapon skins to the characters themselves, the monsters themselves. But the thing that's like insane is that when we talk about it now, a $15 microtransaction is the norm now. If not, you know, on the low end, like some people are paying upwards of $30, $40, £40, whatever, just for a skin. Back then, it was $15, £15 for one of the monsters, one of the creatures that you could unlock, and you could unlock them in the game as well. But it was still a hell of a lot of grind. I still thought Evolve played really well in terms of, and again, gameplay feel, not the rest of it. There was that whole thing about how you would spend so much time just chasing the monster for like half an hour, not being able to engage or whatever it was. A strange old thing, and so many people from Turtle Rock moved on, and then obviously did Back for Blood eventually and all that kind of stuff. But a weird little flashpoint in the at the beginning of the PlayStation 4 generation. Number 12, Pokemon Go.
I thought that was good. I thought people liked Pokemon Go.
This is my list. No, I put this on because when we talk about big things that stopped being as big, there was nothing as big as Pokemon Go in summer 2016. That was the closest we got to world peace. That was when every single person who was playing Pokemon Go was having a whale of a time. And as much as I continued playing it, and I have continued playing it to this day, catching Pokemon all around the world, I named them after the city I catch them in.
Very nice.
I've got one called Top of the Eiffel Tower. It's a very nice time.
That's a strange city, like what?
I'd recommend you visit. One called Mount Fuji. But still, the overall difference between, you know, the heights that it reached and that whole thing where you had the developers Niantic talking about people were breaking the game too easily, which you can argue was the case. You know, there was a lot of websites, there were a lot of third-party implementations, things that would get into the guts of the app itself and would just show where the spawn areas were going to be for the different Pokemon that you could catch. And as soon as people knew where to go, they could just game the system. And Niantic got out there and said, look, we can't allow for that. We need to take the whole thing offline. So they took all the tracking capabilities offline for, I forget how long it was in total, a few months. And by the time it came back up, it was over. It was all done. But I remember, as we all do, because it was the closest time we got to world peace, the swarms of people playing in real time, in real life, everywhere. In the UK, it was a beautiful sunny summer, and I just remember the amount of people playing it and the goodwill around it, and everyone was talking to everybody else, going, oh my God, have you tried catching this? Have you done this? It was just so incredible. So, and also the way that Niantic have gone since then, where they've tried to get so many other IPs off the ground while, you know, implementing this idea into so many different things, and even other developers like the spin-off Witcher game that is like their version of this as well. None of them have worked, and even the ones that have caught on for a little bit are nowhere near the heights of Pokemon Go. So whether initially this was, you know, hailed as like this is the coming of the next thing that everyone's going to be playing on mobile, this genre, etc., and it very much was not. I know that there are other things that came before Pokemon Go, but to me that was absolutely the height of it.
Number 11. Google Stadia. I cannot believe this thing only ceased to be a thing a few years ago. It feels like the Google Stadia, which if you can't remember, again, because you might have repressed the memory, was Google's all-streaming game console system
They didn't
service.
know.
They didn't know, we didn't know, and that was part of the problem. But they had lofty expectations and lofty ambitions for this thing, because while streaming, at least when this was first announced, wasn't the norm in terms of video games, there were, of course, a few publishers and a few console makers who had dabbled in it a little bit. Google Stadia was out there saying, you are going to be able to play the highest fidelity games at 4K, at 60 frames per second. You are not going to even feel like you're streaming a game. It's going to be the exact same as if you had downloaded it onto your next-gen system. And that was their pitch, and the reality, well, it wasn't quite that, you know? And it wasn't just the system itself, because we need to mention some games here. The issue was as well, Google went all in on this thing. They had first-party studios working on Google Stadia exclusives that never came to fruition, so we have no idea what those would have been like. But it was a completely botched movement, I suppose, right from the start. And maybe it was just 10 years too early. Maybe in the future there will be a Google Stadia-like streaming service that absolutely rocks and everyone loves, but nobody wanted to jump in at the time, especially when other consoles were brand new and were selling like hotcakes. And unfortunately, the tech just wasn't quite there yet, and it was unsurprising, I think, when it closed down, as so many Google endeavors have in the past, just a few years after it was launched.
What's the website, the Google Graveyard website? There's a few different ones, but they track everything from Google Glass to this and everything else. Yeah, the way this thing rolled out, it's weird because it makes me think, were they just ahead of their time? Because you do have PlayStation streaming, you do have obviously the Game Pass stuff, the xCloud stuff, And but even then, I don't feel like they have penetrated the mainstream. I don't feel like your average person is streaming their games as much as we keep getting told that's the future of the industry. Whereas I just think whether it comes down to latency, graphical glitches, whatever it is, I just have to assume that most people prefer playing a dedicated, game on their screen that is installed on the thing right in front of them. But yeah, the way Stadia rolled out, the fact that people zoomed in on the footage, went frame by frame, realized that bits of it had been doctored in little different ways to prove that it was more responsive than it was, etc. Or at least that was the conversation at the time, meant they didn't really have anywhere to go when the rubber hit the road and they actually had to prove it in real time. And whether it was an infrastructural issue or just they didn't have the right games, or again, people just didn't want to stream their games, this thing, I feel like barely even got off the ground. Like, I remember more stories around them struggling to refund the amount of people from the money that they'd taken to reset the whole project than I do like seeing anything work well on it. Number 10, Cyberpunk 2077. Will I ever stop wounding myself with these? I love Cyberpunk 2077, and I loved it even back when it first came out. But there's no denying, and we'll not spend too long on it, because obviously it's a very well-worn talking point overall, but you can't deny the momentum that was behind Cyberpunk 2077. The whole thing, which obviously came out post-launch, that CDPR had faked the demo that they showed the press before the game came out, showing the heaving cities and the amount of NPCs and the things you could do in that game, leading to various features being removed from the game, like, using your arm blades to hang out of the wall and shoot people from the wall. Something that I think they eventually put back in, but I remember being disappointed by that. But still, I feel like Cyberpunk is a go-to for, this is the next level of video games, this is the next level of open worlds, and the amount of goodwill that CDPR had behind them from The Witcher 3. I get why everybody was so annoyed by it, and obviously I can see the comparisons between how it was going to come out and then how it did. I still had an absolute blast with it, even though, and even on PS5, it still died every 20 minutes when its file size got too big, which is hilarious. But maybe it was the pandemic talking, but I had a lot of fun.
Well, if you go back to the podcasts we did, Scott, you'll also know that I had a lot of fun in spite of the game that I was actually playing in 2020, playing that thing on a PS5, but running the PlayStation 4 version. It was unforgivable. The console release was genuinely unforgivable. The fact that they charged so much for a broken mess at launch, it was crazy. There was clearly a gem of a game in there, and if you played the PC version, you kind of did get the next big thing in gaming. It just sadly took a lot of years for the rest of us to actually get what was intended 5 years ago. Number 9, The Day Before. Unlike Cyberpunk 2077, there was no redemption for The Day Before. This had a similar lifespan, funnily enough. When the first trailer dropped for this third-person survival game, everyone was wowed by it. It looked, considering nobody had heard of this team before, like it was the cutting-edge thing in video games. It was gorgeous. It looked so fluid. Animations excellent. It looked essentially like the Division 1 if you were getting a more focused and, I guess, less multiplayer focused experience, way more immersive, way more tactile in the gameplay itself. It looked incredible. There was a reason that it became the most wish-listed game on Steam, and that's because everyone wanted to see how this thing was going to shake out, whether it was ever going to look as good as the first trailer did, and then every single thing we saw from that point onwards indicated no, it wasn't going to be the next big thing. It wasn't even going to be a fraction of what those initial trailers actually promised. Although, in the run-up to this game's belated launch, it was delayed so many times, very last minute in certain cases, there were some fans that still believed, and I get why, because the concept of it was great. It's kind of the exact thing that I would fall head over heels in love with if it was on console. It was only on PC back then. But every single piece of evidence that we saw, like I mentioned, just pointed towards the direction that this thing was not just not going to reflect the trailer, but will this even be a game at all? Is there a game there? Is it one big scam? That was the conspiracy theory coming out of the subsequent trailers for this thing. And it turns out when the game did finally launch, it was a game in as much as you could control someone in a world and take on some missions and maybe shoot something here and there. But it was one of the games of the year and nothing more. It became an absolute controversial nightmare and was ultimately pulled from sale not too long after it launched. It didn't even reflect genre-wise what was initially promised. That was a complete pivot that I think even the die-hard fans who were in it right till the end didn't expect. You throw on top bugs, you throw on top glitches, you throw on top things just not working as intended, and the gameplay, if you could call it gameplay, being so half-baked. And it was unsurprising that the day before only lasted about a day before it was bloody pulled from stores.
Oh, very well done. I just remembered there, something that came back to me like a sort of exorcism. I remember when they put that trailer out with the supercars.
Yeah.
And it was just like, what the hell were you going for with that? Why would you want to drive a Lambo if you're Last of Using in the big city? Just
well, to be
burning
fair,
around the corner.
I would have liked a bit of that, you know? Bit of burnout paradise in the dystopian paradise, eh?
Number 8, The Avengers 2020, I might add. This is just something that I feel like Square Enix just tipped the bucket of cash over. Coming 1 year, in theory, coming 1 year after Avengers Endgame, you still had, at the time, the height of the MCU popularity. We were coming off Endgame, everyone was high on what the hell are they going to do next, or having conversations on whether they should even do anything next. But still, we hadn't had a good or a dedicated Avengers game over the prior decade when all those movies were rolling out. The nearest thing that you could get was Marvel Ultimate Alliance 3, and it felt like this thing was an open goal for all the years prior. It's just weird the way this thing fell apart. Before we got hands-on with it, and the reviews on the channel from back in the day, it was the way that they rolled it out. Like when they revealed the characters, the skins, I don't feel like people have ever got over the whole, it looks like the Avengers from Temu kind of thing. And it just, that whole, I feel sorry for the people who got scanned in, because the performances are solid. The actual story, I think, is solid enough. I really like Sandra Sad's Miss Fantastic. Like, I think that stuff is really well done. But then you did get to the gameplay, and you did see the fact that they had like 5 premium currencies, and you did start to get the Destiny style or Anthem style, grindy, repetitive, online style missions. And you also started to realize that the game design, the level design itself, was built for all characters, which meant it was, no one was special. And every character had overlapping abilities, like whole kind of projectile and things like that. And so it just kind of fell under its own weight. But like I said, the fact that it was Square Enix, Crystal Dynamics, Eidos, it had the MCU property, the Marvel property around it in general. And it just was held up like this massive, seismic thing that they just couldn't deliver on for whatever reason.
Even outside of the bland characters and the character design, like you said, it seems like it was MCU adjacent without infringing too much on a copyright claim. I think overall this was the blandest version of this game that you could have possibly experienced, from the level design, which was so uninspired and repetitious, to the character designs and how they actually played, like you said, with all of the overlap in terms of the abilities that you actually had at your disposal. So many characters just felt kind of identical and just a bit of a reskin, down to the loot system. What is the point in a looter brawler where the loot, at least at launch, wasn't even cosmetic? You would get a new skeleton for the Hulk.
I was just going to say, you got like rib cages for him. Like, what's that?
And that would be fine if you at least saw his rib cages change and he had some cool, gnarly abomination type things. But it wasn't. It was the kind of stuff that I would expect on a Game Boy Advance version of Spider-Man, Enter Electro back in the day.
I also realized that I called Sandra Sad's character Miss Fantastic. It's Miss Marvel, of course it is. That's how warm I've been, how long I've been in this room.
It's very warm in here.
It is very warm, to be honest.
But yeah, just bland across the board. The Avengers deserved so much more at the time. And the fact that there was barely even one redeeming factor in this whole thing, arguably the story, and even that, I sometimes wonder if I was just kind of Stockholm syndroming myself into thinking the story was better than it was, just because everything else around it was so bad that it looked good in comparison. But yeah, it was absolutely not it, and I don't know how you can make the Avengers, and not just the Avengers, but that wider Marvel universe that was ultimately added post-launch as well. How can you make that boring?
And it's also like they had the Avengers of voice talent as well. You had Nolan North, Troy Baker, Laura Bailey, and a few others as well. And it's like I said, every part of it was meant to be this humongous release, and it largely just collapsed under its own weight, mainly because of that art direction. But then the more we looked at it, the worse the gameplay side of things became.
Number 7, Multiverses.
Nice.
Now, you know what? Multiverses rightly got a lot of stick before it came out. The idea of taking just random brand properties that Warner Brothers had at their disposal and throwing them into a Smash Brothers clone, on one hand, that seems like you're doing Space Jam 2, but in the video game realm. However, I and a lot of other people that were looking forward to the game thought that was kind of cool.
Yes.
It was really fun, and it was really novel, and it had a lot of humor too, and it added a lot of humor to the game, that you had the likes of Arya Stark going up against Shaggy Doo from Scooby-Doo.
Shaggy Doo?
Shaggy Doo, that's his full name, brother.
Mr. Doo.
Mr. Doo from
Was it not a thing where his name, he's called Shaggy?
Oh, I have no idea.
I think that was a thing.
I don't really know my wider Doo lore.
Mr. Lover. I'm sure I think his full name is Shaggy.
You know, Scooby-Doo's full name is Ian.
No, it's not.
It is.
What
Ian.
do you mean?
Ian, Scooby's a nickname.
Ian Doo.
Yep, don't fact check that. That is true. The point is, getting back to this as we go crazy in this room, Multiverses had a lot going for it. The combat actually was really good. I'm not a Smash Brothers guy, but I found myself really enjoying the beta for Multiverses. I enjoyed the cast of characters that they had in there. Like I said, not only was it a novelty to see these different characters from different IP facing off, but they were good versions of them. Like, from a design perspective, they all translated really well and surprisingly fit within the world that Multiverses had created. The issue, as it often is, ultimately came down to greed and the way that those characters were locked behind either intense grinds or having to buy into the live service element of this game. The beta came out and already included some microtransactions, even though we weren't in an official release, and that was received well, but then, strangely, it was just pulled from storefronts for about a year, and we didn't hear anything about Multiverses and the final release, so by the time we did get to it, and by the time we had the official 1.0 in our hands, one, the hype had died down a little bit, but two, and most crushingly, Warner Brothers hadn't really remedied any of the worries and any of the fears that we had from the beta. It was just as grindy as ever. It just felt as money grubby as ever.
If anything, it was more grindy.
If anything, it was more grindy, right? And at the end of the day, it felt like they weren't actually trying to make a compelling game. They were trying to make a compelling money-making machine, which to an extent all games are. But this one, they got the balance completely wrong. And I just think a lot of these games, it had potential. A lot of the games that we're talking about here were even good in their final form. I just feel like it's such a shame that Multiverses is dead now because there was something there. And whether it would have come around in the game itself or whether we would have had to wait for a Multiverses 2, it's a shame.
Well, I don't know why it's so hard for anyone other than Nintendo to do a Smash Brothers style game. Like, they just never seem to get over the finish line for very long. Like, Brawlhalla is one of the only ones I can think of, and even that tried to overcharge me for a Kung Fu Panda skin. So it's hard to make those things palatable when you have to try and appease the wider shareholder. That's the real multiverse, the wider shareholder universe. Very good. That is forever looming around the outside of the thing that's trying to be done in the middle. But yeah, that idea of a crossover Warner Brothers fighter should print money, and for the large, I feel like the energy around it at the beginning was extremely positive, but it just got worse and worse. And like you said, that was so strange when they just said, like, hey, actually, we're going to pull it back. We're going to try and figure these things out. And then there was a whole thing where they negated people's previous microtransactions. Yeah. And it wasn't a refund, but they converted them into a different currency. And it was like, what are you doing for the, you had the thing, you actually managed to pull it off, but then they just couldn't stick to it. Number 6, The Order 1886. A choice preem cut.
A great game if you can get it for a tenner.
I don't even know if it's worth that. I remember when this thing came out. I remember the run up to launch. Obviously, the graphics are absolutely stunning. Shout out to Ready at Dawn. They're an awesome studio, who sadly I think might have shut down.
They shut down, yeah.
They made Daxter as well, which I love on the PSP. But yeah, the whole way that this thing rolled out, where it was like, this is the beginning of the next generation. It looks absolutely stunning. The idea of hunting werewolves in old school Victorian London, absolutely killer. You've got this modern, the particular time period version of the Knights of the Round Table. I loved all that stuff. And then it was just one of those where the more you played it, the worse it got. It did have the Gears of War comparisons in terms of the cover shooting. And I always love when you can run up to a dude in a cover shooter and do a little melee kill. I want to do it on a little canned animation, dagger in the face, huge fan. But and it let me do that. But the boss fights, the werewolves, the actual thing that was supposed to differentiate the game, complete ass. Just a big ass effect. Absolutely bad time. And they pretty much only designed one boss fight and then just gave you it like 3 times. Where you're just awkwardly waiting for it to charge you and then you L1 or R1'd around and then did a little bit of damage back. It was just such a weird thing. And I feel like initially this was meant to lead the charge on the PlayStation 4. It's obviously alongside the likes of Infamous and Killzone Shadowfall, but this was like the big mature, the Gears of War contender, the previous Xbox 360 generation Aura contender, and I just feel like it dropped the ball. Whether that was the cutoff, the aspect ratio where it just looked a bit off the whole time. I think they patched it eventually to remove that, and I feel like the presentation was the thing that it just couldn't land, even though the elements were solid. And it ends on a cliffhanger. This was clearly meant to be an entire franchise. And I think actually the documents around the sequel have leaked over the years as to what they were going to do with Sir Galahad. But the way that it came together, I feel like it just kind of stumbled.
Like you said, it was especially a shame because while we got great games early on in the PS4's life, this was one of the new IPs that we were focusing on. Like you said, everything else was Infamous, Killzone, even Uncharted 4 when that was finally announced, stuff that we all loved, but nothing new, nothing that was potentially going to define the PlayStation 4 generation. And this ultimately was not it, but I think there was a lot of goodwill and hope that it could be something special, that it could be the start of something. And I know I didn't love the game myself, but I did get to the end, and that cliffhanger that it does end on, I thought, right, this is a perfect place to pick up in a sequel. This is where we can take what we've established here and run with it. And they never got the chance, and it's partly a hell of their own making, because releasing a game like this that felt as unfinished, that had such little content in it that you had to repeat the same crap boss fight 3 or 4 times, that is unforgivable. You can see why people didn't give them a second chance, but I always wonder what could have been if we did get the Order 1887.
Also, classing chapters of your game that are entirely cutscenes, stop doing that.
Number 5, Titanfall.
Josh!
I know, give me a chance to explain. Okay, Titanfall and Titanfall 2, great games, exceptional games. Yeah. However, nowhere near as big commercially or in terms of the cultural mindset as they were intended to be. True. It is crazy to think that when Respawn Entertainment, from the founders of Infinity Ward, makers of the most revolutionary FPS multiplayer game of the past decade at that point, the fact that they were kicked out of Activision or were removed from Activision and then started up their own company and then got into bed with Xbox to create an exclusive, a brand new IP that was going to take the core tenets of the Call of Duty 4 multiplayer model and throw in this whole new gimmick where you can call down a mech and jump into that and start smashing things up in a way that would evolve the classic 6x6 multiplayer matchups. It all had just hit written all over it. You throw on top of that the movement mechanics, the wall running, which at the time was very novel. We hadn't seen Call of Duty do that at all. It just felt like it was a fresh next step for the entire genre. And in a way, it was. When it came out, it was everything we expected it to be. The multiplayer was absolutely fantastic. When we got Titanfall 2, which added in a campaign mode, that was even better. One of the best FPS games of its generation. Yet, because of a multitude of factors, it just never hit the same level of a Halo or a Battlefield, and certainly not a Call of Duty that it was initially primed to hit. And I think in the case of Titanfall 1, that had a lot to do with its approach to multiplayer, which again, kind of like Concord in a much more stripped down way, said, don't worry about it. You don't need a single player story. We're going to tell a story through multiplayer modes. And what that amounted to was a few lines of dialogue at the start of each match about each of the factions in the game. And it was not a substitute for a solid campaign, as Titanfall 2 would prove. That, combined with the exclusivity, combined with the kind of controversial elements of the multiplayer, including bots alongside regular players, including a card system for its upgrades and abilities. There was just a few things that it didn't get quite right, and I think ultimately put people off. So by the time you got that improved sequel, a lot of people were choosing the stuff that they already knew, which was the likes of Battlefield and COD, rather than giving it a chance, even though it had remedied a lot of those initial teething problems.
I have long thought that Titanfall 1 is the reason Call of Duty went down that entire sci-fi bent across the 2010s.
Oh yeah.
The assumption being because you had, Activision were losing 2 of their key figures, like you said, behind COD 4, who were escorted off the premises, by the way. If you want to look into the behind-the-scenes stuff, it's the way that once they found out what was going on, there was a whole thing with people escorting them off the premises and the seriousness of all that stuff. But once wind of what Titanfall was going to be made the waves, I feel like they then said, okay, Call of Duty should get there first, and then eventually leading to the likes of Infinite Warfare and all that kind of stuff. And then obviously when Titanfall wasn't the next big thing, wasn't the next Call of Duty, then COD settled the hell back down again. But I always thought that's why that stuff happened. And also, yeah, Titanfall 1 massively addled by the original Xbox One launch. Like, there was just nothing sold on that original system, just because of the way that all that stuff shook out beforehand with Don Matrick and all that kind of stuff. But Titanfall 2 is definitely the one that I would fly the flag for. But Titanfall 1, that thing still did have the movement system and stuff. But yeah, man, a shame for the way that it all rolled out back in the day. Number 4, Rumbleverse.
What is this? I've forgotten about this, Scott.
Rumbleverse was the next game from published by Epic. It was made by Iron Galaxy. For a little while, it was being held up as the next Fortnite, which is an almost impossible moniker to put onto something. And it was a wrestling game. It was still a battle royale, but it was a wrestling game. You were doing, ostensibly, instead of shooting other players, you would grab them, do different moves, do spinning pile drivers off the top of skyscrapers, that kind of stuff, but with the art style from Fortnite. And it just felt like the general energy around it was, we can have more than one Fortnite. We can make this thing work. And the gameplay was solid enough. It released at the end of 2022, but it sadly only lasted for a few months. Obviously, the player numbers just were not there. But it was backed by Epic. It was, like I said, held up to be right alongside Fortnite. And even the font on its logo and everything, very colorful, very inviting, very much just, let's get 2 of these cash flow streams going, which is very much what a lot of big companies like to do. If there's one big hit, what if there was 2 big hits? And it just didn't work. Player numbers weren't there. The game was shut down like about half a year later. It shut down in the middle of 2023. So, and it's hardly ever talked about now. I feel like for the most part, Epic just doubled down even more on Fortnite. At least to me, that's why you get every single brand promotional aspect is folded into Fortnite, whether it makes sense or not. And we've even seen WWE wrestlers in Fortnite over time, which is maybe something that would have happened if Rumbleverse had taken off. But it's just worth mentioning as an interesting sort of side pivot of where that thing could have gone.
Well, speaking of Fortnite, Scott.
Here he is.
Number 3, Fortnite Save the World. Now, I need to do a lot of clarifications and a lot of caveats here. I was just going to put the title of this as Fortnite, but I knew a lot of people would go straight to the comments and be like, what the hell are you talking about?
I did reply to you going, what the hell are you talking about?
Exactly, you did, which you were my focus group to not do this in the end. So while I'm not necessarily talking about Save the World, which came out in 2020, I think after we had Fortnite Battle Royale, I do think it's important to know that the original version of Fortnite, that is such a cultural phenomenon now, wasn't the Battle Royale mode. No. It was this tower defense PvE thing that I distinctly remember seeing the first trailer for. It was probably at an E3 way back when, and thinking, this is never going to work. This art style with the building mechanics, with the tower defense systems, co-op working together. What are Epic thinking? And I think someone within Epic said, what are we thinking? I don't know if this is going to be the moneymaker we want. And at that point, I imagine a team branched off to make the Battle Royale version and to release that game free to play, where this wasn't, even though it was originally, I think, intended to be free to play at some point. It released formally in early access before Fortnite Battle Royale, but you had to pay for that early access, if I recall, as well. Right. So it asked a lot of the player, and even though we didn't get a proper 1.0 until 2020, the sentiment around the game was just that, yes, it has its fans, but it's never going to be the next big thing that it was initially broadcast as. That was actually going to be the Battle Royale version, which took the foundations of what was in Save the World, the building, the shooting, the character design, even the world, and kind of streamlined it and molded it into a more profitable and a more interesting genre that was brand new at the time. You know, Fortnite Battle Royale was, to my recollection, one of the first big high-profile free-to-play Battle Royale games, and that absolutely helped it go to levels that Save the World just could never, ever match up to. And I think it was no surprise when support for the Save the World version of Fortnite just dwindled over the years, to the point where now it's a footnote in the overall Fortnite story.
The way that it rolled out, like at the end of 2016 into 2017, when PUBG, when PlayerUnknown's Battlegrounds was the only name in Battle Royales, I remember that announcement from the Fortnite devs where they literally just did a video saying like, we love PUBG, so we've done a PUBG mode in Fortnite. which then triggered the PlayerUnknown's Battlegrounds people to say, like, you can't just rip us off and do the thing we're doing. And there was a whole back and forth, but obviously the amount of momentum and the amount of money behind Fortnite ultimately allowed them to sort of win that back and forth. But yeah, that whole land grab at the across 2017 with like H1Z1 was in there as well. There was a few others that were in there too. But I feel like the momentum behind this one little offshoot mode, like, it feels like 3 people and a dog made that on the side of the Save the World team. And then it just kept going from strength to strength, and eventually Epic were able to see the light and then manage it from there on out. But yeah, the early days were crazy. Like, to live through that stuff and watch the trailers and watch the announcements and be like, oh, this little weird side thing is now the biggest thing in the entire industry.
Literally, you get, even if you played Fortnite Battle Royale at launch, after a few months, you were like, this is the biggest thing in Fortnite. The tower defense safe, that's the biggest thing in the world. No, it's changed. It's not that anymore. It's just multiplayer. It's what's going on? What is this thing?
I don't think that's ever happened before the nearest thing to it off the top of my head is the N64 GoldenEye multiplayer.
Right.
Going from, like a little side idea, we'll just put it on the cartridge, we'll just release it, and then it becomes a big thing. Back in the 90s, that's how old I am. The way that like a side mode dominates the main campaign. Like, a lot of people who like love GoldenEye, love the multiplayer. Obviously, the single player is cool too. But still, that idea of a side mode taking on that much momentum is a very rare thing. Number 2, Lawbreakers. Remember Lawbreakers?
Cliffy B certainly wishes we didn't.
Bless him. I feel like Lawbreakers dropped right in the middle of when the likes of Krobie Cat was blown up on YouTube. Just prime cringe fodder, I guess you would call it. Various different games. The likes of Evolve, as well. Just games that were aiming for certain things and just started putting feet wrong over and over. And very much, I'm not going to say it's entirely the fault of Cliffy B, but if you look at the different bits of marketing that he was doing back in the day, Cliff Bleszinski, if people don't know, responsible for heading up the Gears of War trilogy, the initial trilogy anyway, and then breaking away for a considerable amount of time and returning to make Lawbreakers, which, according to people who did play it at the time, played extremely well. Like, a lot of the hands-on gameplay stuff seemed really, really cool. It was just the way that the thing was presented, and also the timing of it, launching in the shadow of things like Overwatch, which, again, like Fortnite, Overwatch only went from strength to strength and only obliterated the competition more and more. And as much as Cliffy tried to get out there and talk about how, they weren't all about that stuff, they're not going to make an Overwatch, naming specific characters, we're not going to have the dwarf with the turret, that's not us, we're more hardcore, and whatever, it still obviously had the comparisons, and it just wasn't able to hang. And I forget the length of the time the game was active, but it wasn't very long. And it went away. They ended up launching a battle royale, Radical Heights, again, Fortnite style, to try and recoup some money. That thing didn't work either. And then he was forced to just put his hands up and go, I can't do this right now. I'm not able to read the terrain anymore. I'm going to go away for a while. And I massively appreciate the dude, obviously in terms of Gears of War and everything. But I think Lawbreakers was incredibly humbling for the idea of him saying, I want to make another $1 billion IP, and then not being able to make any of it land.
Like you said, it was partly the marketing that killed this thing dead, because the game itself was fine. It was pretty good, in fact, in spots. But when you had that marketing combined with the fact that Overwatch, like you mentioned, was just eating everything. Like, we've got Lawbreakers here at number 2, but it could have easily have been Battleborn, another game that was completely overshadowed by Overwatch, and tried in many ways to ape its style and do something a little bit different. But the point was, nobody wanted to give those other games a try, rightly or wrongly, because they had such a high bar of quality up here with the game that was dominating the discourse and dominating the culture. So when you have someone like Cliffy B come in and say, we've got this brand new game, and it's not for the Fortnite lovers, it's for the edgy edgelords out there.
If you're taking gaming seriously.
If you're playing Overwatch, you're 13. If you're playing Lawbreakers, you're 14 years old. Like, you're a cool guy. You're whatever. And I think that the game itself didn't really deserve that reputation, because it was pretty good, and a lot of people had a good time with Lawbreakers, and it was in many cases doing something a little bit different to Overwatch, but the damage was already done, and the next big thing, it was not.
No.
Number 1. Crackdown 3.
Oh, now, the momentum killer.
I'm a little bit surprised that I even put Crackdown 3 so high, because I have forgotten about it. Crackdown at the time as a franchise wasn't this huge thing. A lot of people had a fondness for the first game. A lot of people wanted the Crackdown franchise to return to Xbox and for it to get the push that Gears of War and Halo had. And for a time, with the reveal of Crackdown 3, it looked like that was finally happening. Xbox wasn't just resting on its laurels and trying to to revive a dead franchise and give us another one of a thing that we liked a long time ago. It genuinely was ambitious. When it was first shown off, it was entirely sold around Xbox's then revolutionary innovations, as they described it, in cloud technology. Crackdown 3 was going to be powered by the cloud. And what that meant was you were going to get this dynamic open world, this huge open world that had a lot of cloud-based destruction. So you were going to see way more advanced destruction technology than you would even see in something like Red Faction or Battlefield. And it was going to be all done in the cloud. And it was going to be this added element that you had never seen before in gaming, as long as it would work. Now, after those initial trailers, when a lot of people rightly said, I don't know if this is going to work the way you think it is. How? What? Why? When? The game went away and we didn't hear about it for a long, long time. But still, the promise of that and the potential of those first trailers, combined with the fact that they got Terry Crews to lead the game and be the face of the game, a lot of people thought, I want this to be good, myself included.
Same.
And then the more we saw of it, kind of like the day before, the more we realized that the first trailer was not going to be reflective, ultimately, of the experience. The idea of the cloud technology, while still present in the main game, was toned down massively. It was only available in select modes. It wasn't that expansive implementation that was initially promised and initially touted. And it just felt, at the time, like another Xbox One failed promise. You know, you say what you want about that era for Xbox, and it's probably my least favorite, not really a controversial statement, that of their entire history. But they were trying new things that could have maybe been good. Yeah. The implementation, for instance, with live action cutscenes in Quantum Break could have been good. The Kinect 2, they could have learned from their mistakes. What else did they even do? They definitely did something else. Something like Titanfall, partnering with them. They tried a lot of things, the always online DRM, the digital push, and none of them worked. And I don't understand, were they just doing like this entire plan on a hope and dream? Did they think any of this was a reality, or did they just need something to grab at to say this cannot be done on another machine? But the unfortunate thing was it couldn't even be done on that machine, never mind anything else.
All the stuff that came out about the way the Xbox One was developed, the wing of people or the tech teams that they gave it to, where it wasn't the same architectural team that put the 360 together. It was more of a team that were more known for technological advancements rather than game making or whatever. I have to assume led to things like this, where it's like it sounds cool apparently in some boardroom meeting to say that we're going to have a cloud-powered video game. And then, like you said, the reality of it. Well, I feel like even as that thing was being rolled out, it was like, how can you possibly, if I shoot a thing and the building falls apart in the background, it has to do a server sync to tell the game what that looks like as it starts falling apart. There was just no way that it felt like it was ever going to work. And then the release version, it made me think, and I love Crackdown 1, especially, I love Crackdown 1 and 2, but more so 1, that the entire Crackdown trilogy is pretty much one game.
Yeah.
Like, they did very little in addition to gameplay mechanics of whatever. You got the wingsuit into, and that's pretty much it. But in terms of the feel, like Crackdown 1, 2, and 3 are pretty much the same game. Fun, collecting orbs, but that's about it. And there we have it. That is the rundown of the next big thing games that failed anyway. It's an incredibly warm room if we haven't mentioned that 20 times already, but I am Scott Tilford. That is Josh Brown.
It's always been a pleasure, Scott Tilford. Thank you for having me.
Always a pleasure to record in a swelteringly hot room. Hopefully you had fun, and we'll catch you very soon.